Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another edition of AGS Live and our second instalment for 2023. My name is Dave Barr, and I'm your host and facilitator today for a discussion where we'll be exploring the cryptic topic of how to triage for talent as you look to future-proof your organisation. Now, before I start, I just want to say a very big thank you to all our attendees today and guests and partners and clients of both SAP Fieldglass and AGS. We're very grateful for the time that you've given us, and also want to make a shout out to the team, both at AGS and Fieldglass, for their work. Hold on 2 secs, sorry guys. There we go, it's a live show. So hopefully now you can see me as well. Excellent. Nothing like a bit of tech to get us started. So before I get kicked off, I just want to say how excited I am to have our guest here, Tony Jackson, who I would describe as a living legend when it comes to the workforce solutions industry. She has been involved with our industry since its genesis in the early 2000s, and has worked with organisations through multiple economic cycles at different times before she moved over to the dark side to be part of the technology world. But I'm really looking forward to getting her insights and perspectives around how we navigate this tricky time as it comes to, or as it relates to, our workforce solutions. So I guess before we get started, I did want to just do a little bit of scene setting, because I'm sure there's many of you out there wondering what are we talking about when it comes to triaging for talent. And it's kind of predicated on looking at the concept of a skill-based workforce, really looking at this concept of looking at the work you need to get done as opposed to the worker. So I guess a practical example, if Colin from accounts resigns and goes and leaves, it's taking a step back and actually asking yourself, what is the work, what are the skills we need to do to fuel our business, and what are the channels we look to try and fulfill that role, rather than just going out to replace a like-for-like person in that role. I think it's also fair to say and shine a light on workforce models today are still fairly traditional and quite siloed. And by that I mean, if we think of our workforce made up of three primary workforces, we have our FTE and employee workforce, we have our staff org and contractor population, and then our consulting and services world. Very rarely do organisations peek in through each silo to look at the skills they have available to them and look at what is their entire workforce. So today's very much kind of focused on how do companies pivot? How do we look at different ways, innovative ways to try and tackle this issue and around skills shortages and the talent crunch? Last AGS Live, we talked a lot about this murky and somewhat confusing interrelationship between economic narrative and our workforce and our labour market here in Australia. And I think 3 months on, I don't think it's any clearer. We still have an overarching sentiment of negative economic narrative out there, slowing economy, inflation starting to temper, but still at persistently high levels. Yet if we look at our workforce and we look at unemployment and the most recent ABS statistics, we're still at persistently low unemployment, 3.7%, seasonally adjusted in recent times. We still have this increasing level of hours worked in the last quarter, which again would suggest that there is pressure on the workforce. And probably the only, if we dig deeper into that data, probably the only other interesting statistic is we're starting to see an increase, a rapid increase around part-time working arrangements. So almost 4.2 million of the 13 odd million workforce in Australia is now opting or working in part-time arrangements. So that's, again, an interesting statistic. And then if we look at the data around job vacancies, so yes, we're starting to see them cool off a little bit, 2% down in the last quarter, But we need to put that into context. It's still 89.3% higher than what it was in February 2020. So the demand for skills and the demand for talent remains as difficult as it was during that kind of tsunami of work we saw post-COVID. So it's still a really challenging world. Now, I'm no economist, but just to frame today's session, why are we in this situation? What are some of the considerations around our workforce today and factors that have contributed to this? And I think there are probably three I'll shine a light on. The first is the breakneck speed that all businesses have had to work at around tech advancements. The world has moved at incredible speed because of COVID, and we've started to see there is a real lag in terms of the skills to look at that. And we only have to look at mainstream media, the hype around AI, which we'll talk about today. Regulators, average people like me, we don't understand how these things are working today. So it's very difficult for businesses to navigate their way through it. We've also got a changing demographic in Australia. We're seeing that, people, the baby boomers opting out of the workforce at the end of their careers, they have a rich skills and experience, and the talent and skills pathways at the other end of the spectrum are not replenishing the supply of skills and talent quick enough to sustain our economy. And then now we're starting to see the globalization of talent and skills open up again. Borders are opening up. Countries are competing for skills and competing for talent. And I think Australians and skilled Australians are known for being intrepid. So we're starting to see the impact of brain drain impacting our skills landscape here in Australia. So I've laid out, I guess, some of the considerations and challenges Australian businesses are facing as we have to transition, and the realization that we need to transition from traditional workforce models to this skill-based workforce approach. Tony, how can we find innovative ways to get work done when faced with these scarcity of skills?
Well, you mentioned a couple of good elements there that are really impacting Australia, and I think what we're being asked to design more and more is really the total workforce strategy. The future of the workforce isn't just about previous experience. It's about what are the skills that people have. And companies often employ various strategies to address skill shortages to ensure that their workforce remains competitive and capable. But fundamentally, what we are seeing is there needs to be a shift in the mindset from prioritizing experience to actually valuing skills. And I'm sure that there's people out there, for example, mothers that have fabulous negotiation skills that could probably work in procurement. So, we're looking at those skills now instead of the experience. And that pivotal change has to come through around a candidate's ability and capability opposed to past job history. So this shift recognises that skills are very transferable and adaptable, which enables individuals to contribute effectively to various roles, not just the standard roles that they think they are. So by adopting this mindset, companies can tap into a broader, more diverse talent pool, leading to better innovation, problem solving, and overall organisational success. And if we look at some of the strategies in detail, what I love to talk about is the upskilling and reskilling. We see people letting people go in organisations, yet they're recruiting on other parts of the business. And really, it's about that skills transfer, learning and adopting those skills within the business. Talent attraction strategies have also changed. It's not all about money anymore. It's not about the fancy office, as most people can work remotely, or about the branding. What it is about EX, the employee experience, which is another catchphrase that we're seeing more and more. And it's not just about permanent employees, but also contractor employees and new employees to the business. Employee branding is really important, and we're seeing that now that we're in the digital stage. For social media, company blogging, diversity is really important. Other types of talent strategy is around social impact. Companies need to highlight the social responsibility efforts and sustainability practices that they're doing. Many candidates that we're seeing now are drawn to organisations that contribute positively to their communities in the world. Such a pivot from where we're used to. It's all about the money. Now it's about much more. In conclusion, I really think that the skill shortage trend in Australia is a complex challenge. It requires a multifaceted approach. By fostering collaboration between industries and education, we need to start looking at the education and seeing, are those people that are being trained set for the future? Promote continuous learning within an organisation to look at that skills gap, but also know what is the skills of the future and where are the gaps in our organisations so that we can move towards elevating the skill shortage to a more resilient workforce.
Yeah, no, interesting insight. And I think, yeah, my take on that, you talked about talent acquisition strategies, and I think I often hear it now, it's do more with less. You know, I think,
absolutely.
And I come back to that economic point around businesses are under cost pressure, yet they are under chronic difficulties to find the skills they need to fuel their future prosperity. So it's almost this, paradoxical situation where TA teams are being forced to innovate, forced to drive and do more. And I'm sure there's many in our audience today are sat there nodding their heads, hopefully thinking, yeah, I am being asked to do a lot more with a lot less. And it is complicated. There's no single silver bullet. So apologies to everyone here if you think we're going to answer it all for you today. It is complex, it's complicated. And yeah, but it seems based on your response there's sitting idle and relying on traditional means is just not the answer. We need to innovate as an industry, and companies need to innovate. I talked in the preamble about, again, and I think my colleagues, we know me as a bit of a Luddite, but the impact of AI, and I think any business chat, every newspaper you open, every chat you're on, there's always a constant sort of noise about this concept of AI. And I think as we look to the end of 23 and into next year, I think there's no doubt that in the workforce space it's going to become increasingly harder and whatever else. I guess for me it feels like as a community everyone's talking about whether it's ChatGPT or generative AI. People, again, personal feeling, no offense to anybody on the line, but it feels to me like very few people actually ever talk about the practical implications of it. And then maybe that's just an education process, we're all learning how to use it. But how do you see generative AI impacting some of our audiences day to day and their roles in the future?
So in a recent Gartner report, they're saying that over 60% of enterprise organisations will adopt a responsible AI framework by 2025. So that's quite considerable. And that's not too far away, 2 years away.
Wow.
So, for us, it's about getting and achieving a greater employee experience and the trust in the organisation that does use the AI, because there's still a lot of feelings out there that AI is not a positive experience. But where we're seeing it in customers, and this is something that our technology is also moved to, is designing talent acquisition experiences so that they could do resume ranking, for example, or that they can make decisions on recruitment, candidate matching. Looking at the AI algorithms can match candidates with job descriptions based on skills and experience. And then you've got the predictive analytics. AI can predict the success of a candidate from historical data. So it is making a massive difference when we're looking at the talent acquisition. When we're talking about employee onboarding, people are talking about personalised onboarding, not one size fits all. Having an employee experience when they're onboarding that makes them feel welcome, opposed to it just being a company onboarding. So we're being asked now to look at ways to make the experience better from an onboarding perspective by having things like chatbot, so that they can actually have virtual assistants to ask questions instead of having to go to HR or go to somebody if they've got a question. So making that more personalised. What we're seeing, and I'm sure that everybody, is the amount of surveys everybody's getting, the pulse surveys. Goodness me, you know, SAP has a great way of using surveys. And for example, when it comes to wellness programs, you know, when we're surveyed, it's not just about the job, it's about what we're interested in, where we believe our health is as well, mental health, physical health, you know, trying for them to understand our work-life balance, so that then all of a sudden we get invites to yoga classes, and HR are using that data to help design programs, especially wellness programs, which has taken off since COVID. So that type of AI is really helping organisations look beyond the traditional, you know, having a day off and hoping that you're going to be all right. Learning and development, again, personalised learning, we're seeing that more and more. You know, what are my skills gaps? Where do I want to be? And then having that learning designed for me, opposed to it just being a stock standard off the shelf. And AI is doing a lot in regards to building personalised learning. I think from my perspective, performance management is also a huge area that has been adopted by AI, doing 360 surveys. But what we're also seeing is people are moving away from that standard yearly performance plan and doing monthly performance measurements, so that it's based on real time. How am I feeling? What skills am I looking at? Turning that into, again, going into a data analysis of what are the types of people we need to bring on. HR, they're going to be impacted by automating routine AI tasks, which is fabulous. But again, another big ticket item is diversity and inclusion. You know, having unbiased decision making through the help of AI is an enormous way to help people understand that from recruitment to performance evaluations, we're focusing on the objective criteria and not the personal. But as you say, there's no silver bullet. And despite these benefits, there are also challenges to consider, such potential biases in AI algorithms, concerns about privacy data, and the need for upskilling HR professionals around the use of AI is critical. You know, striking that right balance between technology and the human touch still remains crucial to have a positive human-centric workforce.
I mean, you see and read a lot about the bias and how, you know, again, AI develops preferences much like a human over time. And do you see that as something that's overcomable, or is it something that you think will be persistent and needs to be monitored ongoing?
Definitely needs to be monitored. I mean, it's like anything, the bad behavior will stick in AI.
Yeah.
You know, so it's regulating the AI and not being controlled by it, using it for what it's good at, but also making sure it's audible.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. And look, I think, you know, listening to what you're saying there, I mean, I think we're at an inflection point. Innovation is really, again, no matter how old-fashioned one can be, is a constant reality. And if one doesn't innovate, they're going to get left behind. And if we come back to, you know, that key topic about skills, it's becoming, you know, yes, there are advantages to certain technological advancements and AI, but they're not a point solution and a silver bullet. And, you know, I think it's, again, to this triage point, it's about how do you harmonize the best of digital, the best of technology with the knowledge of humans, and building that human organization, how they synergize and complement one another to make good decisions and provide advice around, yeah, how you triage for skills and triage for talent. Because, as you say, you know, without a knowledge of all those channels, whether you buy, borrow, build is difficult to do. And I guess, yeah, as we look to the future and that piece around innovation, how do you suggest organizations look to ready themselves and be prepared in the future to make, I guess, dynamic adjustments with circumstances, priorities constantly changing? What's your kind of view on that?
Well, I think to set up a triage talent solution that's going to be successful, you have to have that mindset of the total talent. You know, as you talked earlier about having those silos, today we can't afford to have contractors sitting in one part of the business, permanent sitting in another, independent contractors. And also, you've got the enormous amount of services that are, we are a services country, and underneath services engagements are people. And really, they're traditionally called that invisible workforce because they're outsourced, which to me is an enormous talent that we're not even tapping into. So, the organisation, from my perspective, they need to be able to get that visibility across their HRIS system, across their contractor workforce system, which, having those silos of workers in those systems, but having the visibility across both at that triage level. One, it helps with the co-employment, that you've got contractors sitting in a contractor system and not a permanent system, because we've all seen legislation and issues around that. But, from my perspective, it's about change management. But imagine if you could get your business users, and I'm just thinking what triage would look like. A business user has a requirement, and they go into a system and say, I need to get this work done. Now, the system could say, I've got 3 people working for me at the moment that would like to upskill to do that work. The system tells me I have 2 people sitting in my talent pool that have worked for you before, that's sitting there, that's already been vetted, available to work. And by the way, I've got somebody that's coming off a contract that's available for that. That's the type of triage knowledge that helps a business understand what is the right decision to make. And from that, it's very real to get that. Even today, we're seeing that in organisations that have that triage process. But where the challenge is making the organisation and the change management around that organisation understand that if somebody wants to do that piece of work, they might not have the skills to do that. Upskilling them is a much better way to keep the IP, but also retain people within your organisations. And, to give you a live example, SAP has fellowship opportunities, and I have never been experienced to this before, whereas a business manager can put out an opportunity to the company and say, I've got a role for these type of skills that we're looking for. And in fact, I did a fellowship a couple of years ago, and I learned to build an app for the mining industry. And I didn't even know how to spell half of the technology that I was working with, but I was interested in it. God, the Z generation make it look so easy. I wonder if I could learn to build an app. And just going through that process made me much more confident, as an older woman in the workforce. And, that sort of opportunity, I feel that companies should embrace when we're looking at cross-skilling. And having that change management in that organisation to say, John might not have the skills, but he'd be really good and he really wants to do that. But he has skills in other areas that could be adapted and adopted to that. Being open for that, I think, is where we really need to harness. But going back to what are the skills and what are the skills gap, technology plays a substantial part in this whole triage. You need to know what are the skills of your existing organisation. And there are technologies out there like Skyhive and others that really do help you build and understand what are the skills that I have today, what are the gaps in the workforce of the future, and how do I upskill my workforce to meet that? And that's where I think to be successful, you've got to have both the mindset, the change management, and the technology that drives it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. No. I think it's some really salient points there, and interesting about I think you talk about the technology is part of the solution, there's a knowledge base that you know, in terms of triaging, that's required, the human element, but so much is dependent on that cultural mind shift to move away from how you've always done things. And it is, yeah, again, I think it's you know, we are at an inflection point. There are companies that are doing it better than others. I'd say, you know, hand on heart, there are very few that truly adopt that holistic, comprehensive view and map out skills across their whole business. I think there's probably lots of organizations still grappling with the first part of that question is actually what skills do we need for the future? Well, like, how is our business going to?
What skills do I already have?
Yeah.
And again, what are the skills of the future?
Mm.
You know, there is AI technology that can go out to the market and say, this is what a project manager needs from 2023. And a lot of us are still using project manager job descriptions that we've always used. And they're so different. You know, it was interesting that we were looking and doing this experiment in SAP, and we know collaboration is one of the most important skills required for a project manager. Yet on a job description, collaboration experience was not listed.
Mm-hmm.
Yet, you know, if you go out now and have a look at the jobs out there, collaboration and working in a team is one of the top skills that you need.
Yeah.
So we are working off old job descriptions, a mindset of a JD will solve all of our problems. And it really is around what are the skills that we need today, tomorrow, and into the future, and overlay that with what's the strategy of the company.
Mm.
Are we moving to a services organization? Are we moving to be more in the digital age? So you've got to really harness that strategy and then put it back into the skills.
Yeah.
And it's not easy.
No, it's not easy. And I think, yeah, everyone can be a little hard on themselves at times when you look at it, but it is that connection to the strategy and what are the enabling things that one needs to put in place to be able to get there. And as you say, the skills are the first thing. You know, if you're trying to pivot a business, become more green, become more innovative, become more digital, that starts with having the right skills. But as you say, like if you need a project manager, you go to your library from 2003 and pick out a job description and stick that in in a job board and hope for the best. So yeah, look, it's been a wonderful chat, and I'm getting really grateful. And I think some sort of closing statements from me, but I think it's undoubtedly we're in a time of a talent crunch. The skills shortage, despite a slowing economy, isn't going to ease up anytime soon, and we need to sustain our businesses for one, but also the nation's economy. And I think the country as a whole has got a challenging couple of years ahead of it in terms of solving for this, and it's again not a simple equation. I know there's investment from government around migration. I know there's focus around skills and education to look at how do we replenish supplies of skills and experience with an aging population, but no single solution is going to be an answer in itself. I think we've clearly articulated and that traditional methods will only continue to deliver similar results, and that if you're in a situation today where you're grappling with skills shortages within your organization, the very model you operate under is probably outdated, and that innovation is key. Talent triaging, and I think you articulate really well, it's kind of predicated on three things. You need to know what skills you have within your business today. You need to know what skills you need for the future. And you also need to start, and this is where the triage comes in, how do you access those skills? So yes, we all recognize there's a gap, but is that gap best filled by buying in someone, building it internally, training someone up, upskilling, developing people? Or do we borrow it? Do we, do services, do consulting firms, do they play a part of it? And I think often, when I came back to the start of the conversation, when we talked about, Colin from accounts, how do we take a step back and go, righto, we need to look at what skills do we need for the future? Do we need an FTE? Do we need a staff org person? Do we outsource that work, and how do we do it? But to have a view, you need to be able to have a lens over all of those silos. And and a live example, I had a conversation this week with a customer about a bit the same, again, admitting that it is siloed and we support them in a particular area of their, in the MSP space, so their staff all position, but they, this concept of we'd love a talent partner. We love someone who just, our business leaders come to you and go, I need this. And then they have a lens out to the market. And I think, at AGS, that whole concept of building that talent partner, that whole total talent or universal workforce model is, I think, something that, the intersection of all those workforces is coming, and hopefully, organizations start to build and break down the barriers to enable it. But look, Tony, thank you so much for your time and your support and partnership. Obviously we work with SAP Fieldglass the world over, and very, very delighted to have such a great guest with us here on AGS Live. We're going to pause very quickly to see if we've got some questions. So at the moment, as I've been handed by my colleague, now the first question, and this might be giving away state secrets, Tony, so we might have to be careful on it, but are there any organizations that you're working or have worked with who have started to implement this approach and really looking at total talent, looking at breaking down those barriers? Without naming names, of course.
Of course, it's a good question. And I can talk to you about the industry that's looking at that.
Okay.
The professional services industry is definitely looking at and have implemented a number of triage solutions, especially in India, where they're recruiting thousands of people, but thousands of people are being recruited and thousands of people are leaving. So it's almost like a funnel, and they're desperately trying to stop the funnel. So by looking at the skills that they've got and utilizing those people for promotions, they're now starting to stop the funnel at the bottom end. So people are now getting moved around, having opportunities in other countries. They're really feeling embraced by the organization, so their retention strategies are working. So by looking at the skills and the job, they source internally first, then look at where do I go next, which I think is, for the professional services, it is high volume. It used to be, a body shop, but now it's changed. It is becoming much more strategic.
Yeah, definitely. And the second question's come in around, and this is probably going to hit me. I was going to try and throw all the tricky questions to you, but what are some of the advantages of talent triaging, and alternatively, what could be the downside of it? So without sounding too scripted, I think the advantages we've covered a lot, hopefully, throughout today is that, we touched on the internal experience and, skills development, engagement, all of that is, it is a positive. And I think it's, how do we create an ecosystem where we're reskilling our workforce who have demonstrated, an emotional attachment to our brand, they're committed to the cause. How can we develop them and develop our own ambitions as an organization at the same time? In terms of downsides, I'm sure there are some, but it's probably hard to articulate how there could be downsides. I think the reality is we have skill shortages. Often we hear it all the time, how often do we see people made redundant and come back on contract or come back consulting? It's often, an issue where decisions about the skills makeup of your workforce is made purely through a commercial lens, but actually very quickly the business changes its tact and there's a whole bunch of skills we need again very quickly. So, and look, we understand it. We forever get asked around business planning and sort of how do we plan for the future with volumes of hiring, etc. It's incredibly hard, but knowing the skills. Sorry, yeah.
I think another benefit, over and above the skills, is the ability to save money, cost savings. If you're able, from a buyer, to say, I've got a piece of work that needs to be done. Do I have the bandwidth and the skills internally to do it? Do I go out and get contingent labor to do it? Or should I outsource it to a third party to do it? What are the costs and the ramifications of doing those three? Helps organizations understand if they're doing a project, you know, what are the margins on those projects? So, you know, for me, I would use a combination of all, depending upon what's the requirement. But again, it's having that visibility into that, which is the most secret source of the triage process.
Yeah, 100%. Well, look, I think we're running up on time now. We've got a few other questions which we will respond to following today's session. But before we close, I want to thank Tony again for joining us.
My pleasure, thank you.
I'd also like to thank the team who put this together. So Nat, Karen, Jacqueline, and Nicole at SAP Fieldglass for all the hard work and effort that went in behind the scenes to get this set up. You've done a great job. Thank you. And to our audience who joined, thanks again. We appreciate your support. Have a wonderful rest of your day and look forward to seeing you in the next edition of AGS Live. Thank you.
Thank you.